the capital levies that are received in advance and other accruals. Net asset is of 384K, same as our equity, retained earnings. Moving to the last.
The schools in rural areas in the outlying islands.
Come end of March, I think the whole world changed. And
good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, President Aiyaz. I'll be actually very brief, but I wanted to highlight obviously some of the key issues and the key initiatives that have been announced in the 2020-21 budget itself. And as bankers, obviously, you play a very critical role, and it's very important for you to have that understanding, because your ability to, as highlighted by Saud, the ability to interact with your customers and be able to know what the lie of the land is, given what has happened with COVID-19. And also in respect of some of the initiatives that have been announced to be able to spur economic activity is very, very important. Just by way of background, obviously we've never had such a pandemic before. The world has never come to such a sudden and momentous standstill, really. It happened overnight. Planes were flying, were turned around, turned away, or they were about to take off and in fact never took off. The last sort of pandemic, large world-scale pandemic, was the Spanish flu around about early 1900s. But the world was not as globalized as it is today. Our ability to travel, jump on a plane, and travel, ability for people to travel. Tourism, of course, was not as large as it is now. Tourism footprint in those days were mainly, Europeans essentially traveled to Europe. It was those who were extremely adventurous that may go out, on a safari to Africa. It was such a big deal. It took months of travel. But so travel industry had changed dramatically. And as a result of that, obviously, many countries were affected, including ours, because Fiji has 20% of its GDP being contributed towards by the tourism sector, directly. Of course, there are many ancillary services that depend on the tourism sector. The example that I've used over the past couple of weeks is that, the lady who's selling mithai outside the Fiji Airways office is not able to sell a mithai. The lady who used to sell boiled evi is not able to sell the boiled evi because there's nobody working in the Fiji Airways office anymore. Or outside the hotels, where the hotel workers would come out in the evenings or in the mornings, etc. They would not be being able to sell those goods to them. So it has, obviously a spin-off impact, negative impact. What we of course had to deal with the fact that we have now our revenue being severely depleted. So governments, when we had the first case, we then reconfigured our existing budget, the 1920 budget, which was called the COVID-19 response budget, because we knew immediately it would have an enormous impact on our revenue and therefore our ability to, of course, spend, but also our ability to spend on, on budgeted expenditure. So that we did. And of course we took into account the contraction. The contraction now is, in excess of 20%. We have put in place, as far as the budget is concerned, the worst case scenario. If you look at the budget deficit, it's slightly over 20%. So we've been extremely conservative in respect of the revenue projections we have. And of course, we still need to, at the same time, maintain various governmental services. We still need to fund, various statutory organizations. I was talking to the Minister of Agriculture yesterday, talking about AMA. Everybody's talking about agriculture and how it's, that's the new way to go, or, emphasis on that. But of course, you need organizations like AMA. AMA is completely dependent on government budgetary support. You still need roads, water, electricity, etc. And the capital works over them need to continue. The civil service need to be paid. We have a salary bill of $1.1 billion. So those are the expenditures, obviously, that need to continue. And of course, we need to have new expenditures, for example, for health, because we obviously need to invest in health. We need to be, at the forefront of the uptake in technology as far as, testing, etc. is concerned. Now, one of the issues, of course, is about, vaccines. And we have to position ourselves with, currently Fiji's chair of the World Bank, Small States World Bank Organization. We're in the Small States Forum. We're pushing that the vaccine should be a social good through the organization Gavi, etc., for us to be able to get our positioning up there and not be left out. Because if it's going to be left as a commoditized project, commoditized product, then obviously the highest bidder will take it, and small states will lose out. So we have to be at the forefront of those types of initiatives that are taking place. So it is within that context that we have to deliver budget. So the reality of the matter is that tourism is not going to open just because we want it to open. The reality of the matter is that other countries, of course, are risks also when people travel from there. So it's a management of those risks, the risk of your health risk and your economic risk. So you need to be able to find not necessarily a balance, but a ground where you'll be able to ensure that you look after your citizens, you don't have that level of exposure, but at the same time ensure that people actually still get employed, jobs are created, people have money in their pockets, and we're able to have a sort of sustained growth, or be able to have what many people are calling a V-shape growth. You go into a huge dive, so how do we get out of it? So the fact that Fiji is now what we call COVID contained, augurs really well for us, because we're able to put our best foot forward in comparison to other countries. So as a result of that, as you saw that we announced the Bula bubble, the Prime Minister announced that, we put in place a COVID-19 Fijian economic recovery framework. We've got the blue lanes, we've got the Pacific pathways. All of those initiatives have been put in place. Some of them, of course, are giving us almost immediate dividends. Others will be a bit slow. So, for example, the blue lanes have already opened up. We have close to about 30 yachts that have come under this initiative. We expect a lot more yachts to come under that. You would have seen in social media, etc., where people have, put up posts regarding that. So I've got the figures. Some technical issues with the Reserve Bank of Fiji, not with us. But we're just sorting that out. But you will see, just if I can highlight very quickly, because we can't be simply just waiting for the tourism sector to open up, we also looked at new ways of spurring investment, spurring growth. So for example, you will see a huge focus in respect of incentives for people to build. So right from giving very generous grants of $30,000 to families that earn less than $50,000 a year, we're giving them $30,000 grant if they're going to build their first home. Condition being, of course, they have to earn less than $50,000 a year, but they have to come through a bank. It has to be by way of a loan. Even if the loan amount may be $5,000 because they may have some savings. But $30,000 will spur that. If they're going to buy their first home, earn less than $50,000 a year, we're giving them $15,000 grant. It's a grant, it's not a loan. They never have to pay it back. The reason why we've sort of skewered towards having construction with 30,000 is obviously when people construct buildings, very basic philosophy, if you construct buildings, you'll employ people. Somebody digs the foundations, lays the steel, puts up the brick, paints the wall, plumber, joiner, people put the roof up, they're going to spend money in hardware stores, VAT is being paid, etc. And if you'll see, most of you are economists, a lot of you know this, if you look at the supposed Great Depression in the 1930s, your Sydney Harbour bridges and many iconic infrastructure were all built in those days because the government actually went out, followed Keynesian economics and sort of built these structures to basically give people jobs, fundamentally, and create economic activity. We no longer live in the 1930s, nor are we a country like Australia or Canada or USA or any of the European countries. So we have to involve the private sector a lot more in a deep and meaningful manner. So we've got those grants for that. If you're an investor, if you're going to do subdivisions, you get various tax rebates. Any profits earned from the sale of the subdivision lots is non-taxable. You would have seen in today's Fiji Sun that we've advertised about the build to lease. So government is looking at getting the private sector to build various government offices for us. If you look at Lands Department at the moment, throughout Suva, they're in about 4 different locations. If you're a customer, you need all the service of the Lands Department. You don't want to be going in 4 different locations in Suva, it may take you half the day because of the traffic. So you have, one agency that's housed under one roof that not only brings out efficiencies, but we're also looking at, for example, the way that this urban center has grown. Most of the people who most of the people who work in Suva City don't actually live in Suva City. They may be living 3 miles or out towards Nasino, Nandera, Narere, etc. Now, if you are able to move a couple of the government headquarters or ministry headquarters out in that location, you'll be actually going against the flow of traffic, which would be great. People don't have to leave work at 6 a.m. in the morning to get to Suva. So those civil servants, for example, who work in Ministry of Education, if their head office is located in Vale Levu or Nakasi 8 miles, it'll be easy for them to get to work. The traffic flow will be different. And for us, the rental hopefully will be cheaper too, because the land cost in Nakasi is far less than in downtown Suva City. So those are the ways that we are looking at, a huge focus on construction. Now you play a very pivotal role, the banks actually play a very pivotal role. You need to start thinking outside the box too. There are certain situations where we may have state land on which somebody may want to build. And we'll, for example, may sign an agreement with them for a long period of time, which will give them the revenue and they're able to make a margin on that too. So how do you participate? Are you being creative enough to participate in that space? Are you going to be efficient in respect of processing those people who are going to apply for the grants, for their first home buyers? And those people earn more than $50,000 up to $100,000, and they're getting a housing grant of $20,000. On the other hand, of course, because the world global economy is in such a state, and we have now the ability to be able to sort of, look at it from a clean slate perspective, it made many things a lot easier for us. I'll give you an example. In the COVID-19 budget response, we had said that we reduced, actually, not said, but we actually did, reduce, for example, the stamp duty on mortgages and transfer down to a particular level. And I think it was reduced by 50% from memory. When we looked at it for the budget for 2021, we were able to say, well, hang on, many countries actually no longer have stamp duties because it makes doing business a lot easier, it makes doing transactions a lot easier. You still pay, what, 0.4 cents or 4 cents for a check. How many people actually use checks in Fiji anymore? So, and you had something like over 120 different areas or documents where you had stamp duties. And some of them actually were, giving revenue to us for like $2,000–3,000 a year. But the cost of actual implementation was far more than their revenue generated. But more costly than that was the time and the effort that the business people or whoever was going to get that, had to pay the stamp duty, spent in trying to get that stamp duty actually stamped. So we were able to look things afresh. So we got rid of stamp duties altogether. And I think many people are still coming to grips with the fact they no longer have to pay stamp duty. It's been so much part of their culture, the business culture and transaction culture. Secondly, for example, we've got rid of business licenses altogether. And many people still haven't come to grips with the fact they no longer have to pay a business license. They would have seen an article, I think it was in the Fiji Sun, where somebody wanted to open up a shop, but because they were going to sell cigarettes, they knew that they had to get a permission from the Ministry of Health, because you can't sell tobacco without approval from the Ministry of Health. So they went to Nasori Municipal Council and they said, look, you no longer need a business license. Go away and do your business. So then he went to Ministry of Health and they said, for you to be able to apply for a tobacco license, you need a business license. They said, no, I was told I don't need a business license. So we went back to Nasori. They said, no, you don't need a business license. We went back to Ministry of Health. And they said, bring a letter from Nasori Municipal Council to say that you don't need a business license. It went to and froing, for a few days, I think. But the point was that the Tobacco Control Unit at the Ministry of Health, in their tobacco application form, still had a line that says you need a business license number. So these are the sort of kind of bureaucracies that did exist previously. Obviously that no longer applies now, and people need to get up to speed with that. Similarly, even in the private sector, there are many areas where people can improve and provide efficiencies for us to be able to create investment. We reduced taxes, obviously, as far as ECAL is concerned. We still need to maintain ECAL. as we saw that despite COVID-19, we still had a cyclone. Despite COVID-19, the sea levels are still rising. I was just looking at some documents yesterday. We're moving 2 villages to higher ground because of the inundation of rising sea levels. So those things will continue. They are facts of life. And the ECAL is a dedicated fund that goes towards mitigating those risks that arise from climate change. STT is completely removed. We have close to 2,000 items where the duties have been reduced completely or have been reduced significantly from 32% to 5%. Now, what it does actually, when you have such a, what we call a unified sort of approach to tariff rates, it reduces corruption also, because people are no longer able to, control things at the border, try and manipulate things at the border. It makes doing business a lot easier. And as we've seen in the past in certain areas, when you are able to bring down the price of goods, it also will mean that people will buy higher volumes of it. But including in that, of course, there are a number of food items that we reduced duty on. Everyday items, everyday usage items, whether it's fruits, etc., or nuts that people do eat, but also in respect of things like washing detergents, etc., which are everyday usage items, including garments. With zero rated, for example, duty on underwear, undergarments, vests for kids, etc. The young population, people need those things. You need those things. These are everyday items. People need to be able to access those items in a ready manner. How have we still don't have that, do we? I wanted to show you the sort of the financing of it. Once we get the figures out, I can show that to you. For all governments actually have deficits. Now the question is, how do you fund those deficits? We have maintained generally a mix of 70-30. In other words, 70% of our borrowings traditionally come from onshore borrowings. 30% comes from offshore, obviously, because you want a lesser amount of offshore, because you have foreign currency exposure, etc. In this particular instance, because of the fact that our revenue from tourism has dried up, it's contributed significantly towards our foreign reserves. And in order to maintain the very healthy levels of foreign reserves, we are borrowing more from offshore. In fact, we have a lot more sort of capacity to borrow a lot more, but we obviously want to ensure that we borrow within our capacity to be able to use those funds. So we've actually borrowed more from offshore to be able to get more money into the market, more liquidity into the market, more foreign reserves into the market. So that should, all things being equal, and all the high term deposit rates coming to an end this year, that should translate into a lower cost of funds, and therefore lesser cost as far as credit is concerned for the borrowers from the banks. Now, if you have money available at a cheaper rate, obviously there will be a lot more appetite for people to be able to go and borrow money. I think this is where the banks, the mainstream commercial banks, play a very pivotal role, and they need to be able to participate in that space, because that's the philosophy that we put out, by providing all these various incentives. So, with the tariff reductions, we've got the funding coming more from offshore. We have slightly higher repayment this year, because you may recall in 2006, under the former, I think it was the SDL government, they'd gone out to the money markets and had raised $200 million from the money, 150. It was 150 actually. It was 150 US dollars, and of course we've been rolling those over every 5 years. And now this year is the rollover. We've got very excellent funding from World Bank and ADB is very excellent. The reason why I'm saying excellent is very attractive interest rates. So we're rolling that over, obviously. So the cost of our credit will come down significantly. So they are the sort of key fundamentals that we have in place as far as the budget is concerned. Regarding expenditure itself for the different ministries, you'll see the Ministry of Health obviously has got an increased budget. The police force has got an increased budget. Psychologically, a lot of people are saying don't lift up the curfew because it's good, because it's COVID-19, people feel a lot safer, etc. A lot more people unemployed, so the curfew should be maintained. But we've also continuing with our modernization of the Fijian police force. We've finished phase 2, which we have to fund. And of course, the recruitment of new constables into the police force. and we've agriculture has received increased funding. Women, children, poverty elevation has received increased funding. Forestry has received increased funding. So across the board, however, the other ministries we've seen cuts to be able to ensure that we have a budget that's more realistic without compromising the delivery of services. And this, of course, have been funded by onshore and offshore borrowing. So in a nutshell, ladies and gentlemen, that's where we are. Of course, there's an enormous social impact of COVID-19. Unemployment has increased significantly. You'll see in the budget we have allocated $100 million towards the payment of unemployment benefits. You would have heard yesterday, the day before yesterday, FNPF has announced that the rollover for phase 2, which means we'll continue with the payment of unemployment benefits. Those people who have actually become unemployed now get $220 a fortnight, and that gets continuous rollover once they get once they get a job, then it stops. As also announced, we're now going to pay out through the members' funds to the general account, but also topped up by government. A lot of these members, in particular those who work on a weekly wages, don't necessarily have much in the general account. So government is actually funding that. And so if somebody is working, 5 days a week and is now working on 2 days a week, they get actually compensated for those 3 days. So we pay them on a fortnightly basis. Because a lot of people don't realize, things like the garment industry has been affected also significantly. When Auckland is in lockdown, Sydney, Melbourne is in lockdown, and when your garment industry is actually, the main markets are, Auckland, Sydney, Melbourne, there are less people going out and buying garments. So obviously the orders placed will be far less. So this is why some of the garment factories have people working only 1 or 2 days a week. And there are many other industries that have actually been affected from the export market. So we have a huge focus on that. Out of the $100 million we've allocated, we've said we'll spend $5 million as and when the need arises to retrain people. There are some people, for example, who may be in the tourism sector and may now say, look, I've actually got an interest in IT, in the ITC sector, and I've got a particular, proclivity towards that. I'm generally very good with it, but I may need a 6 or 9 month qualification to get me a job in the ITC sector, because as you know, all of you are using more data now, using more phones now, and obviously the jobs in those sectors are quite secure. And it will evolve into new roles too. So, that's the kind of $5 million spend that we'll be having in those specific areas. I cannot, before I finish, I'd like to open up the floor for any questions, if that's okay. I cannot overemphasize how critically important it is for the financial services sector to play a very pivotal role to improve the efficiency. But I know a lot of the banks in Fiji, they have their headquarters outside Fiji. But we really need to be able to play a key partner role within the Fijian economy. It's very, very important for us for that to happen. So, ladies and gentlemen, I like to finish off there. Once we get the figures, I can show that to you. But I thought, I'd just give you a quick summary what we've done, where the rationale and the philosophy behind the budget. But please feel free to ask me any questions that you may have. Thank you.